And good morning. And I'm a little late getting things started today. Apparently I was short on sleep. Slept like over 9 hours last night, so good job. Anyways, we are up to the 2014-2015 season, and in such, this is really where we're getting up to, kind of where we are for some teams. Some teams are still in these spots. Your top 10 in the league, according to the Hockey News Yearbook. Number 1, Carey Price. Number 2, Jonathan Toews. Number 3, Alex Ovechkin. Number 4, Sidney Crosby. Number 5, Duncan Keith. Number 6, John Tavares. Number 7, Erik Karlsson. Number 8, Drew Doughty. Number 9, Steven Stamkos. And number 10, Victor Hedman. So those are your top 10 right there. And Price being number 1 makes complete and total sense considering the season he had in 2014-2015. And we'll talk about him in a bit. We'll start with Arizona. They have 56 points, and they lose the draft lottery. Number 1 was McDavid. They really, really wanted McDavid. Number 2, Eichel. They draft at 3rd, and they draft Dylan Strome. Strome, of course, has been traded since then. So we definitely can't frame this as having been any sort of a victorious season or off season for the Arizona Coyotes. Buffalo, 54 points for them. They draft Eichel at 2. They, of course, were the lowest rated team in the league, and they lose the draft lottery. The draft lottery went to Edmonton. Ennis was their leading scorer, 20 goals, 26 assists, 46 points. They used 5 goalies, as every time that a goalie played well, they got rid of him. It's the only time I've ever seen a team say, oh, our goalie's doing well, we have to trade down, to the point where they brought in Lindback. And Anders Lindback played some of the best hockey I'd seen him play in years when he was in Buffalo. And you could almost feel him thinking, really, you guys think I'm the worst goalie in the league? All right, well, I better get it together. And he played relatively well. And he was winning a game here and there that you could feel that Buffalo Brass weren't happy about. Calgary, they have a surprise run to the playoffs. They had been talked about the year before as being potentially in on Connor McDavid as well, because things weren't going well for the Calgary Flames. But they surprise, they make it. And they make it with Jonas Hiller and Kari Ramo as their tandem. They're solid, not spectacular, but this team makes it to round 2. And Yuri Hudler leads the team with 76 points. So some crazy times in Calgary that year. Chicago, this is their 3rd Stanley Cup. 3rd Stanley Cup in 2010, 2013, and now 2015. The trick was this. Right after, within days of them winning the cup, the talk is about how they're up against the cap, because Toews and Kane, their extensions were $10.5 million each kick in that summer, and they're going to have to trade some players. So some players get moved, and those changes, we're still seeing that now. A team that really never quite fully recovered from those contracts kicking in. And again, you know, it's not about greed, and at the time it was framed as greed, and I know those contracts look better now than they did when they were signed, but it's just, you know, these guys got paid what they felt they were worth, what the Hawks agreed they were worth, and as a result, it made it more difficult for Chicago to maintain their depth, that depth that had made them Stanley Cup champions 3 times in 5 years. 6 years. I mean, it's 2010 to 2015, so you can look and say 5, but technically it's 6 seasons, it doesn't matter. Dallas, they added Antti Niemi after missing the playoffs. I wasn't impressed. That was ridiculous. Their goals per game was 2nd, and their goals against was 26th. And I remember what drove me nuts was that Kari Lehtonen wasn't great. I'm being nice. Wasn't great. 26 goals against average as a team. So, as a team, their goals against average is 26th, and they bring in Niemi, and Jim Nill says, we believe we have 2 number 1 goaltenders now. No. But at least they were paying them that way. The combined cap hit was around $8 million for the 2. I know there are some who still think Jim Nill's a fantastic general manager. I'm on the fence. There are things I see that I go, yeah, I like that. And then there are times that I just shake my head and think, what's going on? The Oilers get 62 points. So they finish 8 points ahead of Buffalo, but they win the lottery, which everybody loved. Everybody was so happy McDavid was going to go to Edmonton. That's how I remember it. Scrivens and Fast were terrible. Ben Scrivens finally gets a shot at a number one job in the NHL. And if you're asking who's Ben Scrivens, that was only 4 years ago. Yeah. And Victor Fast ends up going back to Europe pretty quick after that too. So it was a rough year for the Oilers, but things are looking up now. They got McDavid. They're not going to miss the playoffs for much longer, right? Technically, that is true. The LA Kings, 95 points, no playoffs. They won the Cup in 2014, missed the playoffs in 2015. Very good team. 95 points is pretty solid, but they missed the playoffs. And then they had Lucic in the offseason. So they trade out Martin Jones. Lucic returns in that deal. Jones is good enough to be a starter somewhere, just not in LA. They're not going to give up on Jonathan Quick and bring in and make Martin Jones the starter. So the LA Kings are just doing just a small little retool here to try to get back into relevance. Minnesota, Devin Dubnyk is acquired in a trade with the Arizona Coyotes, and he puts up a .936 save percentage for the Minnesota Wild after said trade. The problem is that while they go on this incredible run, and Dubnyk is incredible the whole way through, they find themselves out in the playoffs against Chicago again. Third straight try that Chicago has knocked him out. Now, in doing this video, I thought, I talked a lot about in 80s videos about how Calgary was a pretty good team, but the Oilers kept knocking them out and kept making them look like they weren't good enough. Did Minnesota suffer through that in the early 2010s with Chicago? Would Minnesota in another division have got further in the playoffs and maybe have garnered more respect than they did playing in the Central and getting knocked out by the Chicago Blackhawks, who are Stanley Cup champions? It's an honest question that we can only speculate on the answer to, right? Montreal, Carey Price is all-world. Fantastic. .933 save percentage in 66 games played that year, I believe. And then they lost to Tampa Bay in round 2. So they had an amazing run. This Carey Price, absolutely the best he's ever looked. And that's where we get into the conversation of who the best goalie is in the league, and people will point at this, and they'll go, Carey Price is the best. But I always kind of felt like Carey Price, while he was the best that season, I think the expectations we have of Price as a result of that season, probably a little bit too high. No goalie can do it by himself. And while Carey Price can be the best goaltender in the NHL on any given night, do I qualify him as being the absolute best in the league right now? No. But at the same time, I do see him as consistently being in the top 5. Absolutely consistently being top 10. But that's a debate that, again, I talked about goaltending numbers a few days ago, and we're still talking about it here. Because it is one of the most divisive things in hockey is which goalie is better. New Jersey, no playoffs for 3 years, so Lou Lamoriello steps down. And when I say step down, I mean ownership was kind of telling him, hey, Lou, you might want to leave. Just, we don't want to be rude, but you might want to go. This isn't working. So he steps down. Corey Schneider has a .925 save percentage. The team is 28th overall in goals per game. They can't score. Their defense, their goaltending is excellent. They just can't score. So that's where New Jersey's at. For the New York Islanders, they get 101 points. That year, it is the first time they passed the 100-point mark since 1984. That's incredible. And Halak wins 38 games. Yarrow Halak looks pretty solid. And the Islanders, their frustration becomes, we need to get past the first round of the playoffs. We need to get past the second. We need to show we're a contender. So that's where the new frustration is for the Islanders. New York Rangers, they're number 1 overall. They don't win the Stanley Cup, but they get close to getting to the finals. They lose in 7 to Tampa Bay in that third round. And Tampa Bay shuts them out in games 5 and 7. So it's tough. Tough for the Rangers. They get shut out in home ice in game 7. And Cam Talbot has this coming out party that year. Henrik Lundqvist gets hurt for an extended period, and everybody goes, well, that's it for them then. And Talbot won 21 games in relief, and his numbers that year were actually better than Lundqvist's. So that's why Talbot then earns himself a spot as a potential number 1 goaltender with the Oilers with a contract that following summer. Talbot was great for the Rangers that year. Made total sense for him to get a shot at being a number one goaltender. Ottawa, they go 23-4-4 down the stretch. Hamburglar goes 21-2. That's 20 wins, 1 regulation loss, and 2 overtime or shootout losses. Then in the playoffs, Andrew Hammond's numbers plateaued. He ended up being 0-2 in the playoffs. Craig Anderson 2-2 in the playoffs. But it does fill Ottawa with enough confidence that they can trade Robin Lehner, and they move Lehner in a deal that gets a draft pick back that becomes Colin White. So that's not bad for them. And Andrew Hammond looks like he should be their backup. But there was even some caution then that Hammond went on a hot streak. It's what goaltenders do sometimes. You go on a hot streak, and it was an incredible one, but it was likely this isn't what you're going to get next year. So there was definitely talk about, well, still Craig Anderson's goal. Hammond's great run aside, Anderson's still the guy. Now, in Pittsburgh, they lose in the first round in 5. There's some unrest about where Pittsburgh's headed and some of their recent playoff results. So they added Phil Kessel that following summer. And they didn't make any big changes. There's never been a sense of panic around Pittsburgh when it comes to playoff failures, which is why I'm not writing them off for this coming 2019-2020 season either, because they maintain things pretty well. Yes, they'll change some guys here and there, but there's no panic. And they still have that core that has proven they know how to win. So this is more of the same. They're coming off of a loss in the playoffs when people are like, well, maybe it's time to start thinking about changing some things. The Penguins go, no, it's not. San Jose, they missed the playoffs for the first time since 2003. And that's when they decide, all right, we need to change some things, and Martin Jones gets brought in to be the starter. San Jose doesn't panic either. San Jose keeps things relatively the same, which, when your team missed the playoffs, is courageous. For a general manager to look at a team that missed the playoffs and go, you know what, this is fine, we're going to leave it. That takes some courage, and Doug Wilson's courage in that is rewarded the following season. But yeah, 2015, the summer of 2015, there was some talk about whether or not San Jose's time had passed as a contender altogether. Missed the playoffs. Are they done? Are they not going to be contenders anymore? Tampa Bay, they're finalists. Bishop wins 40 games for them. I almost said 50. That would be a record. He hasn't done that. Ben Bishop wins 40. And Tyler Johnson tops the team in points in the playoffs with 23. And Nikita Kucherov is next up on the team's playoff list with 22. Stamkos had 18. So this is where some of that Stamkos isn't necessarily a big playoff performer thing comes from, because he wasn't really a driving force in a lot of the games when it comes to the scoring. I think he had 7 goals in 23 games that year. So yeah, I mean, there's something to that on some level. I still like Stamkos, but I can understand that there are some who look at his playoff record and go, and especially when it comes to the Game 7 records, right? But they did go to the finals, and that's something that's easy to forget now after some of the struggles this team has had in the playoffs. Toronto, 68 points, and they say that's it. This is where they finally do it. They finally tear it all down. The Shannon plan begins, and Mike Babcock is hired as coach. And one of the first things the New Brain Trust does is they get rid of Phil Kessel. In a deal that at the time there were some Leaf fans that said that's all we're getting for Kessel, and there were others that said, hey, this Kapanen kid could be pretty good, so everything will be okay. Toronto's on the right track, at least to get back to the playoffs and become relevant again. But we are still in a place where if we start saying, are they a contender for a Stanley Cup in the next 3 to 5 years, that'll lead to a great debate among fans everywhere. Vancouver gets 101 points that year. The Sedins rebounded from no longer being coached by John Tortorella. And the Canucks need a rebuild. They need one. The problem is they made the playoffs. Making the playoffs might have been the worst thing that happened for this team. And I know their Canuck fans are going to hate to hear it, but it's true. This team, by hook and by crook, with Willie Desjardins behind the bench, managed to make the playoffs. And as a result, some moves were made that summer with the idea of, all right, well, we're a playoff team, we're going to be competitive. Whereas if they'd missed the playoffs, if LA had been in and the Canucks had been out, maybe they would have made other moves looking in a different direction. Either way, Benning's in now. He's making changes. with an eye on keeping the team as competitive as possible and the hopes of returning to the playoffs. And the biggest rage moment for Canuck fans that summer was Eddie Lack, who had been a folk hero in Vancouver and who had actually outplayed Ryan Miller during that season. Not in the postseason. In the postseason, Miller showed he was still the better of the two goalies. But during the regular season, Lack had been really, really good. He gets traded for a couple of picks. And neither of those picks are a first rounder. It's a third and a seventh. Yeah, Canuck fans were not happy to see a goaltender that had been basically the de facto starter while Miller was hurt get traded out like that. And the Canucks look at it and say, you know what, Markstrom's ready, we're good. And Markstrom put up fantastic numbers in Utica. So he looked ready, but there were many Canuck fans, myself included, that said, well, Markstrom doesn't win at the NHL level. So that was the problem I had at the time was, yeah, Markstrom just can't win at the NHL level, and we're trading out Lack, and what do we get back for him? Nothing. So that was a conversation that summer. Winnipeg, 99 points, but a win ain't one. I don't know. There's just the number 99, right? 99 points, they get swept in round one by the Anaheim Ducks. And I remember that series just feeling unfair. That Anaheim, it just felt like we were toying with them that whole series. A lot of talk, though, at that point that Winnipeg, a big, tough team, would win a Stanley Cup soon. Very soon. And this was just a building block. And I thought they were overhyped. I did. I thought there were a lot of pundits that were saying, all right, these guys are going to win a Stanley Cup, and this is a Stanley Cup contender. And I thought, you know, they need to win a game in the playoffs before we start really getting on this Stanley Cup hype train. Just let them take those baby steps, and then we can talk about whether or not they're a Cup contender after they've won something in the playoffs and shown some kind of a progression there. Your rookie scorers from that season. Mark Stone, 26 goals, 38 assists, 64 points. Johnny Gaudreau, 24 goals, 40 assists for him. Philip Forsberg, 26 goals, 33 assists for 63 points. Hoffman, 27 goals, 21 assists with the Senators. Kevin Hayes, 17 goals, 28 assists. Anders Lee, 25 goals, 16 assists. And then the noteworthies. Kuznetsov in Washington, 11 goals, 26 assists for him. Jonathan Drouin, 4 goals, 28 assists. And Bo Horvat, 13 goals, 12 assists. This, of course, was during a period where Drouin felt he was ready, more ready, and needed a bigger role. And Tampa Bay was saying, hey, we need to make sure you are ready when you play, and we're not throwing you into a prominent role until you are ready. And there was that back and forth between management and Drouin. Scoring leaders, this is where scoring was down. Jamie Benn, 35 goals, 52 assists, 87 points. John Tavares, 38 goals, 48 assists, 86 points. Sidney Crosby, 28 goals, 56 assists, 84 points. Alex Ovechkin, 53 goals, 28 assists, 81 points. And Jacob Voracek, 22 goals, 59 assists, 81 points. Noteworthy, Jamie Benn's number one on the scoring list. He was not in the Hockey News top 10. So Ben had his, I would argue, probably best season he had. But this was a very low number for a scoring champion in the NHL. So really, really unusual in that we're seeing a period where scoring's starting to go up, and yet your overall leading scorer is way down. So there you go. The 2014-2015 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support, and I will talk to you again soon.